Be me, Curtis, 28. Install Windows for a living. Good with my hands, useless with drama, which is going to matter a whole lot later. Been with Delphine for almost a year by the time this thing finally comes to a head. We met on a job, of all places. Her building needed the old frames pulled out and new ones set, and I was the guy up on the ladder for most of that week. Second morning, she comes out with a coffee for me, no reason. Starts asking questions about the work, seems actually curious about it. Laughs when I tell her I measure everything twice and still check it a third time before I cut anything. Most people find that boring about me. She called it reassuring. Should have paid more attention to the exact words people pick, honestly. We started seeing each other a few weeks after the job wrapped up. The first stretch was easy, the way it usually is at the start of anything. She'd cook, I'd fix whatever was rattling or leaking around her place. We'd throw on some dumb show and not think too hard about anything at all. Felt like the kind of thing you're not supposed to overanalyze. I liked her, liked that she seemed steady, liked that she put in effort, liked coming home to a person after a day of hauling glass around. If you'd asked me 2 months in, I'd have told you it was the best thing going in my whole life. And for a while there, it honestly was. I met her friends early on, and they were fine, nice enough, welcoming enough, the usual. One thing did catch my ear at a little get-together back then, though I filed it under nothing at the time. Delphine got going on a story about some guy she used to date, right there at the table, and her friends leaned in like they'd heard it before and still wanted the replay. She lit up telling it. Whole table did. At the time I thought, good, she's comfortable, she's got history with these people. Later on, I'd recognize that exact spark for what it really was. A few things about those early months are worth laying out, because they make the rest of it make sense. She was attentive back then, in a way that felt completely genuine. Remembered small stuff I'd mentioned once in passing, brought it up later, made me feel like I was actually being listened to. I'm not a guy who gets a lot of that, so it worked on me fast. We fell into routines quick, the way you do when something clicks. Friday takeout from the same place, Sunday she'd drag me to some market and I'd carry the bags and not complain about it. I met a couple of her coworkers at a thing once and they all said the same line, that she'd been talking me up, that she seemed happy. And she did seem happy. That's the part that made everything harder to see. I wasn't walking around miserable those first months. I want that on the record. There were real good stretches in it, which is exactly why the bad part took so long to name. You don't go hunting for the crack in something that's holding your weight just fine. She'd mention exes even back then, here and there, but it was folded into normal conversation, and I didn't think twice about it. A name would surface tied to a restaurant, a city, a song, the usual way people's histories leak out over time. The difference, which I only see clearly now, is that early on it was scattered. Later, it got scheduled. That's the whole shift right there. Scattered to scheduled, and I couldn't tell you the exact week it flipped. Then the Thursday thing started. Didn't register as a pattern at first, because who's sitting there keeping a calendar on their own girlfriend? One evening, she goes a little quiet after dinner, then out of nowhere launches into a story about an ex, not in a let me be upfront about my past way, which I'd have respected. More like story time, with a captive audience of one. Got comfortable on the couch, tucked her feet up, set her phone face down on the cushion like she was clearing the stage before the show. This first one was a guy she called intense, said he had a real temper on him, said he'd turn up at odd hours with no warning at all, said the whole relationship wore her right out. But the way she described being worn out sounded a lot like how most people describe a great trip they wish they could go back on, fond, almost wistful about it. Strange thing to miss, I remember thinking, but everybody's got a past, so I let it slide. The next week rolls around, same couch, roughly the same hour of the evening, and it's a brand new guy. This one was the dangerous one in her telling. Rode a motorcycle, picked fights he had no reason to pick, would vanish for days and come strolling back like the calendar hadn't moved. And she's smiling the whole way through the recap. Little private smile, like she's back there and it's warm out. There was one word she kept reaching for with these men. Toxic. She loved that word, wore it right out. She'd slap the label toxic on a guy and then spend the next 20 minutes describing him like he was the most exciting thing that ever came through her door. The two ideas didn't cancel each other out for her. They came as a set. The toxic part was the appeal, not the warning. She talked about male toxicity like it was a storm front. Something you complain about and brace for, but secretly get a thrill out of when it finally rolls in over the hills. I didn't get it then. I half get it now, and I don't much like what the half tells me. The schedule, meanwhile, was setting up like concrete poured in July. Fast and near impossible to move once it's down. Every week, around the same evening, the X Chronicles. After a while, I could feel it coming, before she said a single word. A certain look would settle onto her face, the phone would go face down, the feet would come up onto the couch. Curtain up. By the second month, I'd basically clocked the timing, even if I still wasn't being honest with myself about what the timing actually meant. The roster grew too. After the intense one and the dangerous one, came a flaky sort of guy, some artist type in her, telling who could never commit to a plan or a person, but made her feel like the center of the universe on the nights he bothered to show. Then, a guy with money who was, by her own description, kind of cruel about it, and she told that one like the cruelty had a certain style to it. Every one of them got the same treatment, labeled toxic, then polished up and set on a little shelf. There were a few more in the rotation before the main event ever came up. A guy from way back she described as her wake-up call, except she told it like the alarm going off was the fun part. Another one who apparently cheated on her, and even that got sanded down into a story about how magnetic he was, how everyone wanted him. Like getting cheated on by a popular guy was its own kind of trophy. The pattern in how she framed all of them was the real tell, more than any single guy in the lineup. The worse a man had treated her, the more airtime he earned. The ones who were actually decent to her, if there were any, never made the Thursday cut. Decency didn't make for good television, I guess. She had a whole theory about men she'd trot out, too. That most of them were toxic under the surface and just hid it better or worse than the rest. That the exciting ones were at least honest about the toxic part, instead of faking nice about it. And somewhere in that theory, without her ever saying it, flat out, nice got filed under fake and toxic got filed under honest. Which put me in an interesting spot, being the guy who fixed her cabinet hinges and remembered how she took her coffee. By her own framework, I was either boring or secretly hiding something worse. No way to win either read. I didn't push back on the theory at the time. Figured everybody's carrying some banged-up worldview out of their past, and you don't fix that by arguing at the dinner table. Just filed it away, same as I was filing everything else that year. Then came the big one, the ex she never actually named. Just called him. You could hear the capital letter land every time. Him was the one who supposedly understood her better than anyone ever had or ever would. Knew what she wanted before she did. Finished her sentences, read her like a paperback. Whenever she brought him up, her whole voice would change. Slower, softer, careful. Like she was handling something that might crack if she gripped it wrong. And here's the part that really started working its way under my skin. Every single one of these stories had a little tag stapled onto the end of it. She'd finish describing some guy who treated her like a backup option, then look right at me and say something like, "You're just so different." Took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand she didn't mean that as a compliment. Different, coming out of her mouth, meant safe, meant predictable, meant reliable the way a dishwasher is reliable. Nobody gets butterflies about a dishwasher. You just expect the thing to run when you load it. So I'd sit there after these stories quietly feeling like I'd been graded on a curve and come in behind a guy who ghosted her 4 separate times. And then I started doing the exact thing that dug the hole deeper. I reacted, asked questions I already knew I didn't want the answers to. Let the jealousy show plain on my face. Went quiet and a little sullen for the rest of the night. And every single time I did that, she brightened right up. I mean visibly, like a dimmer switch getting turned. The more it clearly got to me, the better her mood got. Back then I read it as her being glad I cared enough to be bothered. With some distance on it, it looked more like somebody flicking a switch just to confirm the light still comes on when they want it to. The stories didn't hold steady either. They grew, more detail every week, like each telling had to beat the last one to justify itself. A guy who used to do this one specific thing, a night that went a certain way, a line some ex had said years ago that she still had memorized. And the whole time, she'd be watching my face, not to see whether I found the story interesting, watching to see whether it hit. And I kept handing her something to work with. A flinch, a sigh, why are you even telling me this right now? Fuel. I was fuel, and I had no clue I was the thing getting burned every week to keep her warm. I should explain what reacting even looked like from the inside, because it was never dramatic. Most Thursdays it was small stuff. A question I couldn't quite hold back, so you two were pretty serious then. Anything that let her know the story had found a soft spot. Other nights it was just going quiet and short with her for the rest of the evening, and she'd ask what was wrong while knowing exactly what was wrong. Then I'd either stew on it or try to talk it out, and either road ended with her getting what she'd come for. The talking it out never went anywhere good, for the record. Bring it up, and all of a sudden I was insecure, or controlling about her past, or just not secure enough in myself. Dealer's choice. So, the lesson I kept quietly absorbing was that the discomfort was mine to manage, and the story time was hers to keep running. One Thursday in particular still sits in my memory. I'd had a brutal day on site, blazing heat, a whole house of windows behind schedule, came home completely cooked. All I wanted was to sit down and hear absolutely nothing from anyone. And that was the exact night she pulled out one of the longer him stories, the full version. I was too worn down to perform the jealousy that time, and I caught the little flicker of disappointment when I didn't deliver. Should have clocked it right then, that the disappointment wasn't about me being distant. It was about the show not getting its reaction out of the audience. But I was too fried to do that math, so I filed it with everything else and went to bed. Meanwhile, the rest of my life was simple, and I liked it that way. Up before 6, coffee in the truck, out to whatever site we had running that day. We were deep into a new build stretch around then, whole rows of houses that needed every last window set, shimmed and sealed before the inspectors came through. There's a rhythm to that work that empties your head in the best way. You level it, you check it, you make sure the sash slides clean and the thing shuts tight with no gap. You can feel wind through, you seal it, you move to the next opening. A window either sits right or it doesn't. No subtext, no mind games, no, you're just so different. Glass doesn't rank you against a guy on a motorcycle. There was a guy on the crew back then going through an ugly divorce, and he'd talk about it on our breaks. Lost the house, barely saw his kids, the whole nine. He used to say relationships were just traps with good lighting, and the rest of us would kind of laugh, but nobody really argued. I'd think about him on the drive home some nights, then walk in and sit down to watch my girlfriend run through a highlight reel of men who'd made her miserable, and somehow come out of that feeling like the one who wasn't measuring up. The contrast wasn't lost on me, even back then. I just kept telling myself it was only talk, her processing her past, or venting, or whatever word made it sit easier. Told myself a lot of comfortable things that year. There was one night that should have been the tip-off, looking back on it. It was around my birthday. Nothing huge, we'd gone out for a decent dinner, just the two of us, my night. And somewhere between the food and the check, she slides right into a story about him. My birthday, and I'm sitting there hearing about the guy who understood her so completely. I actually said something that time. Asked her, kind of light, why she always seemed to circle back to these exes. She waved it off without missing a beat. Told me I was being a little insecure. Said, and I'll never forget the exact phrasing, that me getting bothered by it was kind of a toxic reaction. So now I was the toxic one, at my own birthday dinner, for not enjoying the retrospective. I dropped it. Wasn't going to fight in a restaurant over a slice of cake. But a little flag went up in the back of my head that night, and never fully came back down. We took a short weekend trip somewhere in there too, and even that had a moment. We passed some guy on a motorcycle on the highway, and she went quiet, then told me the dangerous ex used to take her out riding, and how alive it made her feel. I was the one driving her somewhere, on an actual trip, in real time. And I'm getting a commercial for a guy from years back. Started to notice the exes never showed up when things were bad. They showed up when things were good, when I'd done something right. Like, she couldn't let a nice moment just be ours without importing somebody to compare it to. A couple of other moments from that stretch stick with me now that I look back. We were picking out something small once, a gift for her sister, I think, and she held up two options and asked which I liked better. I pointed at one and she told me him always had a better eye for that kind of thing. So now I'm losing a coin flip about a gift to a guy who isn't even in the room. Another time I fixed a problem at her place that had been there since before I met her. A door that stuck every time it rained took me all of 20 minutes. She was grateful, genuinely, and then, in the very same breath, mentioned an ex who wasn't handy but made up for it in other ways. Every win came stapled to a footnote. Every decent thing I did got quietly measured against a man who wasn't there and couldn't be checked against anything real. You can't compete with a memory. A memory doesn't leave dishes in the sink or come home wrecked after a double shift. A memory gets edited a little every time it's told, and it only ever keeps the flattering angles. I started catching myself bracing before I did anything thoughtful for her. Do the nice thing, then flinch for the comparison I already knew was coming. That's a strange way to live, bracing to be graded in your own home. I didn't have the words for it back then. Just knew something in me was getting quieter and more careful. And not the good kind of careful. A couple weeks after the trip, I finally brought the whole thing up with Boone. Boone's a buddy from way back, pours concrete for a living, has exactly zero patience for nonsense of any variety. We were grabbing a couple beers after our shifts, and I mentioned it like it was just a small annoyance I needed to vent about. Said my girlfriend does this X story time thing, basically every week, and it's starting to really wear on me. Boone set his drink down and looked at me the way you'd look at a man who just told you he's been paying a monthly bill for water that comes out of his own tap for free. Told me flat out that she wasn't reminiscing, said she was feeding. I asked him, feeding on what? He pointed straight across the table at me. You! Then he broke it down in a way I hadn't let myself see, even though the whole thing had been sitting right in front of my face for months. The stories were never really about the exes at all. The entire machine ran on my reaction, the jealousy, the sulking, the questions I couldn't stop asking against my own better judgment. That was the product she was actually after. Every time I got bothered, she got a fresh little hit of proof that she still had a solid grip on me. The exes were just the bait on the hook. I was the fish, cheerfully biting down on it every single Thursday and calling it a relationship. Boone had a theory about why, too. Figured some people don't feel secure unless they can see the effect they're having, and the easiest way to check is to poke and watch you jump. Said his own brother married someone like that and spent a decade jumping. His advice, though, was dead simple. Stop biting. Don't argue with it. Don't call it out. Don't blow up. Don't announce a single thing. Just quit reacting and watch what the reaction to no reaction turns out to be. The way he put it stuck with me for good. If it's really about the stories, nothing changes. If it's about you, she is going to lose her mind. I sat there holding a warm beer, feeling like a complete idiot. A full year of this, and my concrete-pouring friend cracked it wide open over one round after work. Drove home that night actually thinking for once, instead of just stewing in it like I usually did. And I decided I'd run the test, not as some big dramatic power move, nothing like that. I honestly just wanted to know whether Boone was right, because if he wasn't, I owed her the benefit of the doubt, and I'd feel like garbage for suspecting her. The next Thursday showed up right on schedule, the way it always did. She got the look, the phone went face down, the feet came up onto the couch, started spooling out a hymn story, full production, clearly one she'd been building toward for a couple weeks, and I just didn't. She's mid-sentence telling me how he always knew exactly what she was feeling before she'd even worked it out for herself. And I go, calm as anything. Hey, can you pass the salt? We were eating dinner right there on the couch, salt sitting on the table by her elbow. She stopped, blinked at me like the words hadn't finished loading in. What? The salt, it's right there by your arm. She handed it over on autopilot and tried to pick the story back up. But the thread was already gone. Started it again from a little earlier, went harder this time, more detail, more weight on every part, watching my face the whole way like a hawk working a field. I nodded, salted my food, kept eating, gave her a whole lot of nothing. You could actually watch it not land. Like seeing somebody throw a solid punch and hit nothing but air and stumble a half step because the body expected contact that never came. That first night, she shrugged it off. Figured I was just tired from a long day. But I wasn't tired. I'd simply stopped feeding the machine, and it was already getting hungry. The following week, she came back at it with more. Put herself together for a night we were only ever going to spend on that same couch. Hair done, the good outfit, a level of effort that had nowhere to go but at me. Sat closer than usual, right up against my side. And the story she picked was basically a feature film. Him, at his most legendary, some big dramatic gesture he'd supposedly pulled off once upon a time. I glanced up from my phone, said, cool, and went right back to flipping through install photos from that day's site. There's a very specific kind of silence that happens when someone's used to a reaction and suddenly doesn't get one. It's heavy, it's almost loud, if that makes any sense. She filled it by talking faster, piling on more detail, cranking up the stakes of the story, like maybe I'd just missed the good part the first time through. I hadn't missed a thing, I just wasn't buying it anymore, and you can't fake being sold on something. A couple weeks of this and the whole dynamic started to bend under its own weight. The stories got shorter, because a short story that flops is a lot less painful to abandon than a long one you've committed to. The weeks in between weren't all one clean move either, so I'll lay out how it actually played out. The third week she switched targets and went at making me feel replaceable instead of jealous. Told a story about how easily she used to move on from guys, how there was always someone else waiting in the wings, all while watching to see if that one would rattle me. I asked if she wanted the last piece of bread. The fourth week she flipped to the opposite, got warm and nostalgic about the two of us, the good early stuff, and then slid an X in right at the edge of it to see if the soft setup would drop my guard. Saw that one coming from across the room and just enjoyed the nice part while stepping around the hook. Around then she started testing whether I'd even notice if she withheld the normal stuff. Went a little cold, skipped the good night, sat back to see if I'd come, asking what was wrong. I didn't come asking. Not out of spite, I just honestly didn't have the itch anymore. The not having the itch seemed to unsettle her more than anything else. A man you've made anxious is a man you can steer around. A man who's just plain calm has no handle on him, and she kept grabbing for a handle that wasn't there to grab. Every week the tactic changed, and the result stayed exactly the same. I almost felt bad watching her run the plays into a wall. Almost. And then she started doing something brand new. Instead of telling me about the exes, she started asking me things. Do you even care when I talk about my past? You used to have so many questions. What happened to you? Why have you been so quiet lately? Is something wrong? And I want to be clear about the exact shape of what was happening here, because it's the whole point of the thing. The woman who'd spent a year making me feel like the runner-up was now the one fishing hard for reassurance. She'd built an entire weekly ritual around watching me squirm. And the second the squirming dried up, she couldn't stand not knowing where she stood with me. The jealousy she used to farm out of me every Thursday had somehow crossed the couch and set up shop on her own side of it. She was jealous of my silence, jealous of a phone screen and a folder of window photos, jealous of the plain fact that I could sit there calm while she performed and not once get up and chase after it. The chasing spilled out past Thursdays too. The texting during my workday picked up, little check-ins that weren't really about anything, just casting a line to see if I'd bite. One afternoon she actually swung by a site to bring me lunch, which sounds sweet and might have been, except she'd never done it before, and the timing lined up a little too neatly with me going quiet. The phone calls were the part that really showed how far the whole thing had flipped. She started calling in the evenings now, not about anything in particular, just to keep me on the line a while. On one of those calls, she brought up him again, but the tone was different this time, almost desperate, like she was reaching for the old reliable button and mashing it harder. Told the story, waited. I said something like, "Sounds like he was a lot to deal with," and let the pause just hang there. She filled it fast, then filled it again, and by the end, she was basically interviewing me about whether I still found her interesting. The woman who used to sit back and watch me squirm was now doing all the talking herself, just to keep dead air from forming on the line. Another call she came right out and asked whether I was seeing someone else, which I wasn't and had zero interest in being. The only someone else anywhere in the picture was the version of me that had quit playing her game. And that was the one guy she couldn't get at, no matter which way she came at it. Then she reached for the card I really did not see coming, even after the birthday warning shot. Told me my silence was kind of toxic. Let that one sit there for a second. The person who romanticized every genuinely rough guy she'd ever dated, who used the word toxic the way most people use salt, decided that me quietly eating dinner and declining the bait was the toxic behavior in the room. A full year of the ex parade was fine. Me not applauding for it was the red flag. She framed it like I was doing the thing men do when they shut down. Some emotional withdrawal she'd apparently read all about somewhere, which was rich considering the withdrawal was just me finally not participating in a game I'd been losing on purpose for months. I didn't argue. Arguing would have just been another reaction, another scrap to feed on, and the kitchen was closed. said okay, and let it go quiet again. And going by her face, that quiet was worse for her than any blowout fight we could have had. Somewhere in that same stretch, her friend said something to me that pretty much sealed the whole thing. We were all at another little get-together, nothing fancy, and Delphine had stepped off to the kitchen for a minute. Her friend leans over, half joking, and asks if everything's all right between us, because apparently Delphine had been asking her whether I'd checked out, whether I seemed different lately, whether she should be worried. So now the private thing had gone semi-public. She was out canvassing her own friends, trying to figure out why I wasn't reacting anymore. That outside confirmation landed harder than anything Boone had told me, because it came straight from her side of the aisle. The woman was genuinely rattled, and the only thing on earth that had changed was that I'd stopped handing her my reactions on a plate every week. This all ran on for a good while, her poking, me declining, the tension climbing another notch with each passing week. I'll be honest, it wasn't fun to live inside of. Part of me missed the easy version of us from those first couple months. Before the Thursdays turned into an audition, I kept deliberately failing on purpose. There were nights I nearly caved just to make the air in the room breathable again. But going back to being fuel wasn't on the table, no matter how heavy the quiet got. She tried a few more angles in there too, credit where it's due. One week she told a story that made herself look bad on purpose. Some regret from an old relationship, clearly fishing for me to comfort her and get pulled back in through the side door. I told her that sounded like a rough situation and left it right there. Another week she skipped the exes entirely and just tried to needle me directly, poking at little things around the apartment, testing whether she could get any rise at all out of me over anything. The tank stayed empty, and every failed attempt seemed to wind her a little tighter than the last. Then came the night the whole thing finally cracked wide open. It was one of those same evenings. She'd floated a story earlier that went nowhere, and she'd been simmering on it for the better part of an hour. Out of the quiet, she just says it. You used to at least react. And there it was. The entire year boiled down to 5 words in her own voice. Not, I miss talking to you. Not, I feel like we've drifted apart. You used to at least react. She said it like a complaint about a service that had quietly stopped showing up. Like my reactions were something I'd been contractually providing and had canceled on her without any notice. I set my fork down, and for the first time in a very long time, I said the whole thing straight, no cushioning on any of it. Told her I reacted for a year, told her I knew exactly what the Thursdays were, and had known for a while now, that she told me about those men so I'd feel like second place, over and over and over, and that the point was never the exes, it was watching me shrink a little with each one. Said congratulations, it worked. For a long stretch there, it genuinely worked on me. And then I told her it was finished. She went from flat to 100 in about 2 seconds trying to talk me back off of it, all of a sudden, the stories didn't mean anything. They were just conversation. I was reading way too much into normal venting. I was being cold. I was being distant. I was being her old, reliable, toxic. Funny how that particular label only ever surfaced right when her grip was slipping. I didn't bite on that one either. Just stood up, took my jacket off the back of the chair, and told her to take care of herself. Walked out the door. Truck started on the first turn of the key, which after a night like that felt like the universe tossing me a small bone on my way out. Sat in the driver's seat for a second before I pulled off. Not sad exactly, more like the feeling when you finally work a splinter out of your hand after leaving it in for days. That clean little rush of relief when something that's been nagging at you for way too long is just gone. Drove home, actually slept the whole night. Woke up lighter than I had in months. Told Boone about it a few days later over the usual beers. He didn't gloat, which I appreciated more than I said. Just nodded and told me he'd seen it coming the second I described the schedule to him. Said the tell was always the timing, that real reminiscing doesn't run on a weekly clock with a spotlight aimed at your face. Couldn't argue with the man. She reached out a couple times after, in the weeks that followed. A message here and there, testing the door, some of it warm and some of it working. The toxic angle one more time to see if it still had any pull. It didn't. The whole point of the game had been my reaction, and I'd finally taken that off the table for good, so there was nothing left for either of us to do. I turned that last night over in my head a lot in the days after, replaying the whole thing. Not because I regretted walking out, I didn't for a second. More because of how clean it all snapped once the one piece holding it up got pulled out. A full year, and it turned out the entire structure was resting on my reactions and nothing else. Take those out, and there was nothing underneath. No shared thing, no real us. Just a setup that needed a live audience to exist. Boone put it in his usual blunt way when I said as much. Told me you can't tear down a house that was only ever a stage to begin with. You just cut the lights and walk out, and there's nothing left standing behind you to miss. I'm not telling this to dunk on her, for whatever that's worth. My honest guess is, she'd been running this same place so long, she didn't fully know she was running it anymore. Probably learned it young, probably had it run on her first. No way for me to know. Doesn't much matter to me at this point. What matters is I spent a year feeling like the runner-up in my own relationship and calling that arrangement love. And the fix wasn't some big confrontation or a shouting match or a grand speech. The fix was just refusing to keep playing the part she'd cast me in. Quietest thing I've ever done, and it worked better than anything loud ever could have. Here's the part that stuck with me the most, though. I install windows for a living. All day, every day, I make sure things sit level and square, that they open clean and shut tight, that nothing's crooked or letting a draft slip through where it shouldn't. And the entire time I was doing that at work, I had one crooked thing sitting wide open in my own home, and I just kept living around it like it was normal. Let it stay that way for the better part of a year, because calling it out felt like more hassle than just tolerating the draft coming through. Took Boone about 10 minutes to spot it, and took one quiet Thursday to prove it out. Never did learn the name of the guy she called him, and at some point, I flat out stopped caring to. Whoever he was, he ghosted her repeatedly, and she still had him up on a pedestal years later. Me, I showed up every single day, fixed her stuff, sat through the whole weekly show without complaint, and got ranked underneath a motorcycle and a bad temper. A few weeks out from all of it, I noticed how much quieter my own head had gotten. No more bracing before I did something nice for somebody. No more running the whole evening back afterward to figure out where exactly I'd slipped in the standings. Started picking up an extra shift here and there just because I felt like it, not because I was dodging going home. Boone and I grab beers same as always, and the topic barely comes up anymore, which is how you know a thing is actually finished. Watched a guy on the crew get engaged around then. Good guy, good match from everything I could see, and I caught myself being genuinely happy for him instead of going sour about it. That surprised me a little, that I hadn't turned bitter on the whole idea of it. I think the thing I'd been scared of, before I could have put a name to it, was that the problem was me, that I was too boring or too plain or too something to ever be somebody's first pick. Turns out I was just somebody's prop, and a prop and a partner are not the same job. Knowing the difference between those two is worth more than the year it cost me to figure it out. So I'll take being the different one all day. Turns out the silence said more than any jealousy I could have ever faked for her. The one thing I'll give myself real credit for is this. The story finally got an ending she didn't get to write. MFW The Story Time ran clean out of story. Been sleeping fine ever since.